Hi, this is Courtney Taylor from the Dandy Warhols, and you are listening to The New Scene.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The New Scene. I am your host, Keith, and we're back with another brand new episode. And on the show this week, we have Rodrigo Palma of Her Head's on Fire and Saves the Day. And let me tell you, I really loved this conversation with Rodrigo. We learn about his upbringing in Chile during dictatorship rule, the plebiscite that took place in Chile. I didn't know about the history of all the things that have happened in that country, and Rodrigo fills us in on that. Really interesting story about that and how his family emigrated to New York. And in addition to that, we cover the bands, Empire State Games, Her Head's on Fire, who just put out an excellent new LP on Iodine Recordings. It's called Strange Desires, and I urge you all to go check it out immediately. And Saves the Day. Rodrigo has been the bass player for Saves the Day for quite a long time now. He's done a lot, he's doing a lot, and we're going to hear about all of it soon. And we also have this month's Artist Spotlight interview with Nick Hannon of Sons of Alpha Centauri. Sons of Alpha Centauri put out one of my favorite releases of the year. The record is called Pull, and it features the legendary Jonah Matranga on vocals. So we talked to Nick about the history of the band and their latest record and some other stuff. So make sure you stick around till the end of the episode. You're going to want to hear this. But before we get to all of that, I need something from you. And that something is Apple Podcast reviews. We're on the push to 300. We've been on the push to 300 since June. And I want to see a lot of activity this week. Open up your podcast app, search The New Scene, go in, scroll down a bit, and hit the 5-star button. And if you write a review, I'll read it at the end of the show. I want to see 9 new reviews this week. We're at 261. I want to see 9 new ones. So let's get it going. Let's boost that number. I want to get to 300 so that I can stop announcing this for a while. Help me help you. And don't forget to support Iodine Recordings. Teardrops, Crooked Heart, the 7-inch flexi single is up now for pre-order. That's a single from their upcoming EP. Hey Thanks have a new single called Forward, and that's coming out on October 2nd. I'm looking really forward to hearing that. One Line Drawing have East Coast tour dates, and they start on October 17th. Check their page or the Iodine page for a full list of dates. Further Seems Forever, Hide Nothing, the 20th anniversary edition of this LP is up now for pre-order, and this is the album that features the late, great John Bunch on vocals. And Audio Karate will be joining Piebald and Hot Rod Circuit on their West Coast tour dates. Check their page or the Iodine page for information on those shows. Sign up for the newsletter. You'll find out about everything first. The vinyl, the shows, the news, everything. You can sign up at iodinerecordings.com, and make sure you follow them on Instagram at Iodine Recordings. And don't forget to support our sponsor for the month of September, Persistent Vision Records. Farn, Repercussions of the Self. That's the new album from the Funeral Sludge collective, Farn, and it's out October 18th. The new single Soul Shadow is out now, and vinyl pre-order is up in the US and Europe. So make sure you pick up this record. The new LP from Blind Girls, An Exit Exists, is out now, and that's fast, chaotic hardcore screamo from the Gold Coast of Australia. Rain has 2 new releases out there right now. El Nai a Pas de Orchestre, that's their LP reissue, and a collection of splits and EPs from 2004 to 2015. That's out now on vinyl and cassette. And the 2024 pressing of No Wall Ever Contained the Spring by Abak is available now to order. This has been out of print and largely unavailable in North America for a long time. This deluxe 2024 edition of the vinyl comes in beautiful packaging with a poster insert. We've got 250 on white with black and brown splatter and 250 transparent amber with black smoke. Get one soon because they will go fast. And make sure you don't forget to check out the new LP from Prisoner, Putrid Obsolete. This is a must listen. Visit persistentvisionrecords.com or deathwishinc.com for records and merch from Abak, Massa Nera, Respire, Page 99, Prisoner, and all the other bands I mentioned. You can follow the label on Instagram at Persistent Vision Records. Okay, so listen, check back in with me after the conversation with Rodrigo. We'll do a quick recap, and we have our Artist Spotlight interview after that. So strap in because we've got a great episode. And right now, we are going to speak to Rodrigo Palma of Her Head's on Fire. Enjoy. All right, we are here now with Rodrigo Palma. Rodrigo, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Keith.
Yes, Rodrigo, it's exciting to have you here. You know, Her Head's on Fire just put out an excellent new LP called Strange Desires.
Thanks.
And you've been a member of Saves the Day for a long time now, who have made a lot of music we all know and love. And look, you've done a lot beyond that, and we're going to cover all of that, Rodrigo.
Cool, man.
And more.
Yes.
But first, I want to ask you.
Yes.
How are you doing today?
Today's good. It's a nice day here in Chicago. I feel like just sometimes the nature of being a dad and a musician, and perhaps it's just my brain, that I always feel like I'm just kind of like skateboarding into a new situation, and then I'm like just barely hanging on. But my motto is you just got to drop in, So I'm just I'm pushing forward, man. And today's a good day. I got my I just picked up my bike from the bike shop. So I love riding around town. After we're done here, I'm going to go pick up my daughter on my bike from the YMCA, and it's just fun to ride around on my bike in Chicago and just be outside. Sunshine is nice. So I'm stoked. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you just have one child?
I have one child.
How old is she?
She is 5 and what are we? We're in August. So 5 and 8 months. She can read, which is fucking nuts. I'm just an incredibly proud father of who she is.
I have mucho respect for parents who still find time to do music, because I have no relationship or child at this stage, and I still feel like I struggle to find the time to do everything I want. So, if you're doing multiple bands and everything you do and being a father on top of that, much props to you.
I don't thank you. I don't know how I do it. Sometimes, it's funny, and I'll tell you this, like, you have no idea how much free time you have right now as a childless person. And it took me having a child to realize, like, oh yeah, I had time to like watch a movie or like read something that I choose. And it's like being a parent is both awesome and exhilarating, and there's so many beautiful experiences and moments that I it's hard to imagine my life without them, and it's hard to imagine my life now without my daughter. But it's such a complete emotional, mental shift. Whether we tried to be as ready as we could for this, and we weren't. That's just, it's just one of those things that, like, until it happens to you, like, you just don't know. You don't know how your heart will explode, with love and joy and fear. And it's everything all at once, all the time. So it's a crazy journey, but, yeah, I'm just so excited for every moment that I get to spend with my daughter. And I'm also thankful for when I do have time to do other things, which is necessary. It's very nourishing as a human being, and it's important to be a human being, because I feel like my daughter's watching me, And for her to have her own independent life, she has to see me also having an independent life.
Yeah.
So it's wild, man. I mean, it's like now if she's in the car and I'm, when we're driving places, sometimes like if a car, when she was very young, like if a car cut me off, like I would turn into the Hulk. I would be filled with like this intense rage where I'd be like, I'm going to stop this car safely and get out and pull this motherfucker out of their car because they endangered me. And it's like a intense feeling. And it's like, okay, got to chill out. Like that's not, can't be doing that. You never know who you're encountering. And then it's, it's wild, man. Like she's very talkative. She's always been very verbal. For like the first, between like age 2 and I want to say 4, this was like in the middle of the pandemic. And so I'm like, basically, all my tours were canceled. I was a stay-home dad. We were like in a very, shifting place in our life here. And so, I'm like trying to take her out to parks. Like a lot of parks are closed. And it's like, all right, like I'm with my daughter like 24/7 and, it's beautiful and I appreciate it, but also being a human being in that experience. It's like, man, like I am the only person I'm having conversations with are a toddler, and the time that I have to like check in with my partner to be like, hey, this is a new thing. Like, how are we going to manage this without being authoritarian parents? Like I want to be authoritative, but that's different than being like authoritarian and being like a parent that says no or creates conditions of no. But it's like, we have to impress upon her safety and respect. And part of that, I think, is like I've always talked to her like an adult, as difficult as that is, and try to like, I have to like figure out my words very slowly. So it's like, all right, she's developing a vocabulary and I have to try to cut to the essence of what things are and being like, yo, this stove is hot. So like when we're making pizza tonight because we're fucking tired. So like, I know you're curious about the stove. Like curiosity is awesome. Like we can be curious, but like safety. So like, being like, we have to like go on the far side of the wall when the stove is open just for safety's sake and like trying to communicate these basic things, but at the same time, like delineate like, yeah, all right, we'll show you what this is. Like standing back here, when we open the oven, you can sense the heat and we're trying to give her words for like heat and danger. Like danger is important, but danger is also scary. Like what does that mean to like a toddler? Like I'm not, like injury. It's like, how do you communicate these words? Like these are important vocabulary things to know, but like it's a wild trip, man. For those 2 years, like she got into Sesame Street, which is awesome. Sesame Street, PBS, stand by it. It's awesome.
Oh yeah, I used to watch Bob Ross every Saturday morning. Still do.
Bob Ross is great, and as an adult, I realize now it's like I'll watch YouTube stuff. I catch up on like the late night talk shows, like the monologues. I like my dystopia delivered with a little bit of humor.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm watching these shows, and it's like I haven't really been on network TV for like over a decade. So it's very interesting when I'm over at my parents' house, or even when I'm watching like YouTube stuff, the advertisements, right? Everything is advertisement. And I used to love watching basketball, but I can't now because it's like, it's just too many ads just bombarding my face with, these very like lizard brain images of like, oh, you got to feel insecure about this, feel insecure about that. Like you are unsuccessful because you can't afford this vacation or this car or this retirement plan.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. I am a worthless human being. Like maybe I should, buy some new shoes because my toe is poking out of the ones that I have. So it's like, how do we talk about these things? And so, and all right, where was I? We're watching PBS. She's into Sesame Street, and the child's imagination, like they're still delineating fantasy from reality, and it's all mixed up in there. So for like 2 years, we're in the pandemic, and she's really into role play, and she would give us assignments where she's like, "You are Cookie Monster, Mom. You are Abby Cadabby." And so it's like, okay, now I'm Cookie Monster, we're Abby Cadabby, and we're just trying to get her to brush her teeth. So it's like we're like adopting these characters. And of course, the whimsy and the fleeting nature and the attention span of a 2-year-old is instant. And in her mind, she hasn't established necessarily this full psychological separation where we are independent people with our own independent thoughts. So in her mind, at some point, she'd switch characters, but without telling us. And then she wouldn't, stop to be like, okay, she's 2, so she's not necessarily enunciating everything, and we're like kind of deciphering her language to some degree. But like at some point, I am no longer Cookie Monster, and now I'm Ernie. And then she would be like, get frustrated because she's like, no, you're not Cookie Monster. And I'd be like, whoa, like, and at the same, and this is all in the context of like, we are just trying to get her to brush teeth with us. So it's like, all right, for 2 years, it's like, I didn't know who I was at any given moment. I was no longer Rodrigo. I was a rotating cast of characters from Sesame Street or from Daniel Tiger, or when I got her hooked on, in my pandemic shutdown brain just becoming mush. One day I'm like, all right, kid, I'm going to sit you in front of the TV. I'm going to flip on some Beatles videos. Like it just kind of dawned on me. I'm like, all right, like we've watched every Daniel Tiger episode that is available. It's pandemic, and it was like a heat wave or it was a snowstorm. And I had this bolt of lightning that was like, what is the most wholesome music video that we can watch? Cause like I'm playing records for her, and she was, digging some of them. But I found Ed Sullivan, the Beatles performance on Ed Sullivan show, the black and white ones, and they're amazing. If you ever watch them, if you ever revisit them, like they are electric. Like you feel the energy from the band.
That performance is what started basically all the 60s and 70s classic rock, because when you hear those guys get interviewed, they all say, I watched the Beatles on Ed Sullivan and then I wanted to start a band.
Yeah, it's awesome. You're watching like basically these, they must have been in their teens or early 20s, and they have it. Like I've seen a lot of punk bands, and like even within punk, it's like, especially now in the age of mass media, there's a bit of cosplay sometimes. And my friend Matt, I think you've interviewed Matt Pryor. He had this great phrase, which kind of like we'd see these punks with like the spiky mohawks and like the leather jackets and the studs, and he'd call them Civil War reenactors, which is apt. It's like you're living in this moment that doesn't exist anymore, And so there's a bit of cosplay, there's a bit of posturing in punk, and like, yes, rock and roll has always been imbued with a degree of theater.
Yeah. I think those are like good starting points. It's like it's an established look, and you can start there and then maybe work into your own thing.
Everybody has an entry point, and like there's certain generational things where it's like, man, I remember watching Radiohead and Nirvana. I didn't have MTV, so there was like some like Saturday morning countdown thing that happened before Saves the Bell was on the air. And I remember seeing Radiohead, and it blew my mind. Like these guys looked emaciated and weird and scary. And I was like, these are my guys. The whole like Bon Jovi world with like the perfect teeth and the girls stuff, the Van Halen, the pants, that to me seemed like such clown bullshit.
Yeah, that was already like out by the time I discovered guitar driven rock,
Yeah, and so like I from my parents, I listened to a lot of like Chilean folk music and like classical music. And I had my older cousins turn me on to like Iron Maiden and stuff when I was in middle school. So like that was a lot of my world. But on the radio, it was like R&B. I loved R&B. Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, like that stuff was my jam. And then one day on like it was like the countdown. I would always listen to the countdown, and it was like Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, and then there was like this new band called Nirvana, and they played "Smells Like Teen Spirit," and I was like, "This fucking slaps."
That was our generation's Ed Sullivan moment.
It was. It really was, because I was like, this seems way more authentic. And yes, there's some older head. It's probably other guys in my band that are like the generation above that are like, oh yeah, they were just trying to do the Pixies. They were trying to just do Dinosaur Jr. And like, sure, yes. I'm not going to argue with that. But it was
still, though,
it was a moment. It was certainly a moment. And
when you look back on that, it was funny. I saw it was a reel on Instagram of like the original video for In Bloom or something. Like Nirvana was in New York City with their original drummer. And when you look back at that now, that looks kind of like a costume. So it's just funny how like something authentic can become kind of a costume, with enough exposure and time.
Yeah, because and that's the way that the mass marketing worked. It was like Nirvana exploded, and it almost only took me a year, because I was in middle school. Nirvana happened, and I was in school band at the time. I was playing trumpet. But I was like, I told my parents, I was like, I want to learn how to play the bass guitar now. Like, that's just what I want now. And it seemed so accessible. It seemed easy.
Quick question for you. You were born in Chile.
Yes.
How long did you live there?
We moved away from Chile probably the same age that Zola is now, which was, I think I was just 5.
Where did you end up? In the U.S.?
In the U.S., we landed in New York City, and I think we stayed at some like budget ass hotel there. We had friends that were also that were my parents' friends. I think we both landed in the same airport, and we did like a tourist day of New York City, and then they hopped on a plane to Connecticut. Their dad was going to study some sort of like nuclear engineering at Dartmouth, or I don't know what the big university is in Connecticut. And we flew to Albany, New York. And so we landed in Albany, New York. My dad was accepted into the PhD program of engineering at RPI, which is across the river in Troy. And we were homeless. So when we landed in this country, we didn't really have a place to live. We had friends who provided their daughter's bedroom for us for a week. So the 4 of us in my family, we slept in this girl's bedroom for a week. And my mom recently sent me this message, because it was like, I think we landed in the States August 1st, 1984. That's when we landed. And I don't know if you've been to college. I don't know if there's other people that have been to college, but it's like you're supposed to figure out housing several months in advance. And no one told us. It wasn't like there were websites, and it wasn't like receiving mail or information in Chile at the time, which was a dictatorship. It wasn't easy. So we just showed up, being like, all right, like, we're here to start, my dad's like, I'm here to start my PhD program. And there were like, the contacts that we had were basically names written on like a sheet of paper.
Yeah.
And, we're using payphones. It's like, we have like quarters, like limited quarters that we had exchanged. And we're figuring out this whole system. And my parents are learning English. And there's 2 boys, myself and my older brother, who had taken English lessons, but it was really basic stuff. Like, we played with like little army men and plastic toys to be like cow, door, house. And so we're navigating this place. And my mom, who is incredibly persistent, would show up at the housing office every day to be like, yo, we have a family. Where do we live? And the housing office, they don't have computers at this time. So they're like opening these files, being like, okay, we're shuffling through this. And they're like, yeah, all the student housing has already been accounted for. And my mom is incredibly persistent, and she has almost like a Columbo like nature where I think she was just showing up at their office every day being like, yo, there's got to be something. And through her line of questioning, she established that the students hadn't moved in yet. And there's like a grace period where they're cleaning the dorms. And, through her Columbo line of questioning, she's like, oh, so you're saying that they're accounted for, but there are empty dorms at the moment. And, they're like, the staff, they're like, oh, I guess so. And so my mom, being very persistent and not taking no for an answer, is basically like, we are going to live in one of these dorms until, you figure out a situation for us. And so my family lived in a dorm room for like a month. And we shared bunk beds. My parents were in the top bunk. My brother and I were in the bottom bunk. And there was like a common area. We didn't have a kitchen, so we're using like the dorm showers, and we're like cooking food in like the kitchen. It's unfathomable to me to think of doing that now. Like I feel very fortunate for the hard work that my parents have done, and just the fortune of the low interest rates that we were able to buy a house, because living with my wife and my daughter in a dorm room right now seems completely insane. I don't know how my parents did it. And the thing is, like, I think back to that, and they were fun memories. Like, my brother and I would just run loose in the student union, playing with the topiary, throwing paper airplanes off the balcony. But it's wild, man. It's a wild journey. And so we weren't able to visit. So we landed in the States 1984. The plebiscite in Chile was in 1990, and the flights to Chile are very expensive. They still are. It's cheaper to fly to Ireland from here than it is to fly to Chile. But also because of the plebiscite, it wasn't really safe or certain to be able to fly back to Chile and then be able to return. When my dad got his visa approved to study in the United States, it was like we heard he got it like a week or like 2 weeks before we were on a plane to fly to the States. It wasn't a certain thing to happen. And there was still a fear that like once we went to like the passport check and the customs control to leave Chile, that they would be like, no, he can go, but you guys can't. And that there would be some sort of family separation situation. So it was very uncertain, but like, by stroke of luck, we were able to fly. We all landed, but until 1990, we could neither afford nor was it, it was risky to go back to Chile, before the plebiscite.
When was the first time you went back?
I want to say like it was either, sometime in 1990 after they held the plebiscite, or it was around that time. It was like 90 or maybe 92, somewhere around then.
And what is the plebiscite for those who don't know, including me?
So the plebiscite. So in 1973, September 11th, 1993, there was a military coup where the socialist president of Chile was assassinated, and a military dictatorship, an authoritarian dictatorship was established. There were curfews. People were imprisoned. It was bad news. My parents were university students at the time, and they got involved with a lot of resistance network type of activities. We had a printing press, which was illegal, like a screen printing press, hidden in our attic. And I'm only saying this right now because even for like several years, my parents were very cagey in talking about this. And there's almost like a sort of like passed down trauma if you visit Chile, and like people that are of my parents' generation in talking about what happened. So in 73, there's people that disappeared. Some of my extended family, professors and things of that nature. And it's a military dictatorship. I remember I have like some early memories of riding my tricycle down the street, and there's a guy with a giant machine gun at the end of my block. And I was actually telling this to somebody the other day. I was very curious. So I'm learning to walk. I have my little tricycle, little green tricycle, and I ride down to the end of the block, and I start to see this military police at the end of my block, and I'm just curious. Like, this is just the world that I live in. I don't really understand, but I'm curious about this guy. And at some point, I noticed that my mom stopped following me. She had been calling me to be like, "Hey, come back, like, stop going that way." And so now I'm face up with this guy with this, like, AK, 47, one of these submachine guns that like takes up that's as large as a human torso type of device. And there's two of them. And I look back and I can hear my mom, where as before, as a parent, she's like, very assertive, being like, "Hey, Rodrigo, like, come back, like, you're going to get in trouble." But now she's off in the distance, and I can't quite make out her face. And she had strategically stopped at a distance where the police can't see her and have cause to detain her. And now her voice is calmer, and she's pleading. She would say, "Rodriguito, vuelve, por favor. Es la hora de volver. It's time to come back." And the police guy, I remember him conversing with my mom, like, "Hey, come. Is this your son? Like, why don't you come get your kid?" And she didn't respond to him. She would just say to me, "Rodrigo, it's time to come back." And at some point, I kind of like sated my curiosity, and I kind of understood that the tension of the moment. I was like, "All right, well, this guy seems to kind of slightly be antagonizing my mom to a degree. He can't make out her face, and like I can't make out her face. Like, she's far enough, but like I'm gonna turn around." So I head back down the street, and my parents were always very wary of police, because that was the environment that they grew up in, where you could be detained for any reason, and especially owning certain books, owning certain records could again be cause for being detained. And so between 73 and 1990, it was a very precarious situation. And I tell people now, because like in the US, we're living through a moment where it's like, people think of authoritarianism or dictatorship as like being in Nazi Germany. And my experience in Chile isn't necessarily that. It's like we could play in the park. We could drive to the grocery store and just kind of live our mundane, boring lives. But there was always this threat of powerlessness and not having a recourse, where we tried to stay together, like even driving to my aunt's house, who lived in kind of like a richer part of town, was always fraught with like there might be a checkpoint. And if there's a checkpoint, we might be stopped for credentials. And if they don't like the look of the credentials, or if they don't like the look of your jib, like you could be detained and we could be separated, and it would be incredibly difficult to get information.
Right.
So there was always this kind of just dark cloud of like shit can turn sideways at any moment. So cut to 1990, and there was actually a great movie about this a couple years ago, starring Gabriel Garcia Bernal. And the title of it is simply No. And it talks about the campaign where at this point, Pinochet, who was the dictator in Chile, was kind of losing friends within the U.S. He had made a couple errors. There was a bombing where there was a Chilean ambassador that whose car got blown up in D.C. And the U.S., where now Chile has a human rights museum in Santiago, the capital, and they talk about there's been a lot of documents of like CIA involvement in the coup, and Nixon and this motherfucker that just died, Kissinger, were involved in this stuff. And so there's documents. There's a lot of evidence of it was part of like this the Red Scare kind of policy that if this country elects a socialist president, then all the chips will fall. And so 1990, Pinochet, the dictator, is starting to lose friends, and through various pressures, within Chile and outside of Chile, they're like, yo, you either got to give up power or you got to do something. And there had been sort of sham elections and sham plebiscites before, where basically they're like, a plebiscite is not a vote. It's more like a vote of confidence, where there's you cast a vote that says, yes, I'm okay with the dictatorship, or no. And for many years, it was basically you'd show up to polling, and it's not a secret ballot. There would be like someone that is armed, watching you take your vote. So, given the nature of the dictatorship, it's not a really, like if someone's like holding a gun nearby, not pointing it at me, but you understand the threat.
Yeah.
That like, all right, I guess I'm writing down my name and address, and I'm saying, no, I don't like the dictatorship, and I'm going to now slide it into this box for the guy with the gun to watch me do this. I would expect a knock on my door in the middle of the night, or just
Exactly.
a kick on the door in the middle of the night. And this was something that happened. But in 1990, for whatever reason, there had been enough resistance. Pinochet was kind of losing grip on power. And so they held a plebiscite. There was a national campaign, detailed in this movie, to be like, yo, you got to vote no. And so the plebiscite was overwhelmingly no. And so between 1990 and I don't remember when the first Democratic election was held, it wasn't until at least maybe like 4 years later. Those dates could be off. But the plebiscite was such a rejection of the regime that Pinochet decided to step down. And when I say step down, what he ended up doing was rewriting the Constitution, which, again, I think he had rewritten previously. But he added to the Constitution that he would become senator for life, which would make him immune from prosecution. And this is a tactic that you see with a lot of authoritarian governments when they're like, oh shit, like, the shit's about to be crumbling down, and instead of waiting for the people with the pitchforks to like come for my head, I'm gonna set up something very cozy for myself, which is what he did. So in 1990, there's the plebiscite, and now there was a timeline for elections. And within that environment, we were able to return and visit family. And, by that point, like, me and my brother were older, I think my brother was like, so I must have been like 10 or 11. My brother, 13 maybe. And we're seeing a lot of our family for the first time in a very long time.
That must have been a really great feeling, right?
Absolutely. And also strange feeling, like,
what was it, like 8 years or something?
8 years
more?
or something like that. And it's weird, I think, I've tried to ingest other media about the immigrant experience, which for me, it's like, people who live in the States or were born here, like, you usually have cousins and grandparents, and how what an uncle is, and it's like I had an idea of an uncle, but it's like I'm not having weekends or vacations with my uncles in the way that I mean, I would have vacations with my family and spend time with my family before we left, and I have good memories about that. But for a time in the States, it's like we were very isolated. We had to, in a way, like, find our own tribe, our own crew, other immigrant communities. And growing up in RPI in Troy, there was the community of all the exchange students. So, like, a lot of my friends growing up were from all over the world. Friends from China, friends from Egypt, Iran, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and we would all play together. We would all play kickball, We'd go to each other's houses and eat our weird food. And it was a very different experience. Like, we were a little crew of us international kids, and we attended the public schools in Troy, which I haven't like looked back too much on the history of Troy, but it's like Troy itself is an urban environment that experienced segregation. Not maybe legal segregation, but the kind of segregation that exists in Chicago, which is like, oh yeah, there are poor neighborhoods that are underfunded, and that's where the people of color end up. So like, my public school was very racially diverse, but what was very noticeable was the class divides, where you had the children, the International Kids Club, which were like children of poor students. And then you had people of color that were historically denied wealth and access to housing and such. And then you had this other side of it, which was like white people that lived in kind of like these exurbs, and literally in the higher part of the city, because Troy is right on the Hudson River. So it's like you have the historic part, which is lower, and there were apartment buildings and some historical houses, and then you go up the hill, and it's like a larger single family homes, and kind of smack in the middle there was the student housing area where I grew up.
Yeah, my neighborhood, very segregated too. And I went to high school in the late 90s. And in my high school, there was not many people of color, like only 2 or 3 that I could even remember. So it was just mostly whites. And then, you had poor white people and middle class white people and then the rich white people and a few others thrown in there too. So it sounds like kind of a similar makeup.
I feel like traveling and touring, you start to notice a lot of these things. In my experience of like being an immigrant, going to elementary school and middle school in Troy, New York, and then when my dad completed his PhD program, he worked for like a small electric motor company in the Albany area. And there's some other sort of racism in the way that he was treated there. But then he applied for a job at Ford, and he got a very good offer at Ford. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, wow, now we have more income. And my dad got this offer at Ford. And so my family moved to the Detroit suburbs, Canton specifically. And that was a total sea change, because before then, I was able to, as a middle schooler, travel by myself. Like, I could go to the bus, I could ride the bus, I could go downtown. I was like skating with kids and like starting to get kind of involved in like DIY. But then all of a sudden, my parents are like, okay, we are moving to the suburbs of Detroit for a better life. And they had done some research, like, they really cared about school and those kinds of opportunities. So we moved to the suburbs. And the suburbs were, to me, such a strange, suffocating experience. To this day, I have a hard time finding my parents' house when I go to visit, because they all look the same, and I would get lost.
Yeah, where my parents live, the developments, right? Depending on the first letter of the development, like if it begins with a C, every street starts with C.
Oh, God.
In the development.
Oh, no.
And people that aren't from there think that's complicated, but I'm like, oh, no, that's, that just means I know what development is.
Yeah, right. Yeah. If you understand the system. No, and it's like there's so many cul-de-sacs that like I would get lost. And you don't see people in the street. It's like I felt very alone and isolated when I moved there, because I was learning to skate, and I liked riding around. And all of a sudden, like, I lost any connection to like other kids that skated. And I'm at this new school, and I'm angry at my parents. And so I'm like skateboarding down the street to the elementary school that has like a big parking lot. And I start skating there. And for the first year of skating there, like, I would never see any other kids. It was almost like children didn't exist. And so I'm like skating late at night in this suburban middle school's parking lot. And I feel I feel it felt like the gaze of the whole neighborhood is upon me. I'm trying to land a kickflip and failing, and it's like I'm like the only person that's out here at like 6 p.m. and in the distance, it's like everyone's suburban's home. They're flicking on the lights for dinner time, and I'm the only one out here. And I'm like, man, like this fucking sucks.
So you mentioned how you started playing bass and were inspired by seeing Nirvana. When did you start playing in bands? I know you were in Empire State Games, an excellent band for a while. Talk about leading up to that.
Man, I mean, if you want to start at the beginning, like, I started playing in bands when I was in Troy, New York, just going to punk shows. And, I saw Nirvana on TV, and, I got together with my friend, Theo, who was a drummer, who was also in school band. He was one of the percussionists in school band. And we were psyched on Nirvana, and he had an older brother that was like, cool. And so his older brother, was turning him onto like Moss Icon and Fugazi and stuff like that. And I started going to shows in downtown Troy. They would have like matinees, and some of the kids that I skated with were also going to shows. So like we kind of had like older brothers to some degree. And I love my actual older brother, but like at this time, like he was a huge nerd. And I apologized to him because as the younger brother, I tormented his ass relentlessly. Because I was hanging out with we were getting into messed up stuff, man. Like we were in middle school, we were like stealing beer from from like not the 7-Eleven, but like the local kind of a convenience store at the end of the block. We're doing bad stuff. We're skating. We're cutting class. All my other friends in middle school smoked cigarettes, which is crazy to think about. As a 40-something-year-old man now, I'm like, you see kids that are like 12 and 13, like smoking cigarettes, like what the fuck? Like I'm taking those cigarettes away from out of their hands, being like, kids, like, what are you doing? But that was my crew. And so between Theo played drums, I played bass, and my friend Bill, who it took me years to realize that like he came from a really messed up home. His parents were like both alcoholics. And he convinced his parents, because they're alcoholics, and he was essentially like left abandoned to a degree, where like I would come home and his mom would be like passed out, just drunk, and he would say things to her that like to this day I'm like, what? Just a crazy way to grow up. But perhaps some degree of compensation or blackmail, for all I know, he convinced his parents to get him like a Charvel or Ibanez or some like green demon looking guitar, and like a solid state half stack. And he had it set up in his room. And so we brought our stuff over there, and I started writing songs, just riffs. Like I knew how to write. I was like pretty good at writing riffs. So I'm like writing riffs. I'm teaching Bill how to play guitar, and we were called Dead Baby. And we played 2 shows, and there were like some of the older kids in the scene that were like, all right, like these kids, all right, like 2 of them are talented. Bill wasn't that great of a guitar player. God bless him. Messed up kid. I hope he's all right now. Theo and we were coming from like school band background. So like we had at least some discipline and musicality to fall upon. Bill, to his credit, I think had really good instincts on like how to, it's like, all right, you're a kid. Like what is the dumbest, like a good riff has to have like a big dumb feeling, I think of like, to me, the best 2 riffs of all time are the ones that like you don't need to have a guitar, that you can just pound out on a desk and like they will make sense. And I'm going to name them for you. It's Beethoven's 5th Symphony. Dun 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 dun. Like you can hum that. You can bang that out on a table, and it's heavy as fuck. The other one is Earth Crisis Firestorm.
Oh yeah.
Dun 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 taka 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 taka. That gets you amped. And so like Bill had a good instinct of like, all right, this is big and dumb. And in terms of like my early musical development, it was like, all right, like I feel like you have to have a sense of like what has like a physical force to it. What is the music that has like a physical impact? So it was Dead Baby. Then almost a year later, I'm moving to upstate New York, and I have my bass, and I'm just like by myself. I took a vow of silence for my whole freshman year of high school, and so I'm just like shedding in my room. I'm shedding to 108. I'm shedding to Helmet, and I think one day some kid notices that I was wearing like a Melvin's shirt or something. I forgot where I saw Melvin's, or maybe it was a Quicksand shirt. And he's like, "Yo, like, you like Quicksand? You like punk rock?" And at this point, like, punk wasn't something that entered my lexicon. I knew hardcore, but like, I was like, people always use punk and hardcore and kind of like as cousins of each other. But I was like, I don't know what punk music is. So he starts introducing me to like Minor Threat and like Misfits, and he connected me. I had a jam session with him, and so like at this point, like my favorite music is 108. 108 to some degree is like still the top for me. It was 108, Helmet, and of course because I'm a freshman in high school, I loved to shred. So I was learning Primus songs and I was learning Red Hot Chili Pepper songs.
If you're gonna shred on bass, those are two bands.
Those are two. Yes.
To learn that, yeah.
Yeah. So
I was just watching. I just saw a clip of Les Claypool playing. I don't know, something. It was an old Primus performance, and I was just like, God, he's just incredible.
It's bananas, and I think there's something coming strangely full circle with a lot of these new emo bands.
Yeah.
And as a sort of anthropologist in my way, like I like to kind of study and keep up, and like tapping is back.
It's been back.
And to me, it's very interesting because I don't know. The first band that I saw do it in like the indie world that kind of made it cool was Don Caballero.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's somewhere between Don Caballero. I don't know American football that well, if they started doing the tapping stuff. But like the kids love to tap.
I really started noticing it again during the 2010 emo resurgence.
Yeah. What's up?
They all do it.
What's up with that? Because I feel like in 1995 or even, between 95 and like 2005, if you were tapping, you'd get laughed at, like I talked to a guitar player in Her Head's on Fire, Jeff Dean. I'm like telling him about like how all the kids are tapping, and he's an old head. So he's like, what the fuck? Like, it doesn't make any sense to him.
Yeah. It's a whole thing now because they're even doing it in metalcore and, like there'll be like the Firestorm type breakdown you talk about, but now they add in all these pinch harmonics and tapping. It's a whole universe now.
It's wild because I remember, metalcore is one of those words. Like I remember Morning Again from Florida when they were starting to come around. That was like late 90s. And they were, there was always kind of like the undercurrent of metal in hardcore, but it was kind of like a really dumbed down version. But somewhere between Earth Crisis and then Morning Again, it's like pinch harmonics and like to some extent solos and a way more upfront love of Slayer. And Slayer's cool. I don't, I fuck with Slayer a little bit. My extent of like deep metal knowledge is Iron Maiden, but like I appreciate. I'm an appreciator of early Metallica and Slayer. But I'm not going to pose. I can't pretend that like I'm a deep Slayer fan. But I remember Morning Again, and like all of a sudden, the metal aesthetics were way more present. And then Don Cab started doing the tapping, but like kind of like in an artsy way. But before then, it was like if you were bringing tapping to the rehearsal session or the practice spot, and you had a tapping riff, people would be like, "What the fuck? Like, get out of here! Like you don't." You don't belong here. And there's another conversation to be had there about like the tribal aesthetics of punk and what have you. But yeah, tapping. I know how to tap. I know how to slap. I haven't done it in a very long time. But I feel like the kids are on the verge of discovering Primus and absolutely losing their shit.
Have you seen, there's like a running meme where there'll be a Primus video and everyone underneath it will respond, Primus sucks. But it's actually like an ironic thing. That means you actually like them. Like I'll never forget one guy posted, Primus sucks. I listen to them every day.
That was their thing. I went to see Primus when my brother. So we moved to suburbs of Detroit, Canton, Michigan, and my brother gets his license, and he decides to do an identity shift, and he's like very interested in his younger brother now. So he starts asking me about like what music I listen to, and he's driving me to shows, and he drove me to see Primus on the condition, our mom was like, yo, you got to bring back your little brother who's a little nuts. You got to bring him back safely, and my brother was like, yep, got it. So we went to go see Primus, and that was their thing. Like people would chant Primus sucks. Like that's been their thing since like the 90s.
Even back then.
Yeah.
So you're taking in all this stuff. You're playing in upstate New York. Where do you land when you like start touring and really getting out there? Are you in Detroit at that point?
So this is Detroit. So then I'm in the suburbs here, and I'm looking for people to play with. I get connected with Arun, and we had a little band. It was like a high school band with a terrible name, and I was writing riffs that are somewhere between Primus and Orange 9mm. And 10 years ago, I would have been way more embarrassed to say that, because that sounds truly awful. But maybe there's a kid now that is into the tappy stuff and like shredding bass that would be like Orange 9 and Primus. Okay, that sounds sick.
It's weird how it's cyclical, because 10 years ago I might have been like, but now I'm like, I want to hear that band.
We had the stupidest high school band name. It was called Fish Guy. And there are tapes circulating out there. I think there's some old cats that still have the tape. I have a friend who is one of many friends I have played in the band Wolf Eyes, who are one of my top 10 bands ever. And Crazy Jim, he still to this day, he would kind of bug me. He's like, yo, Fish Guy was so good. And I think he's actually like really sincere about it. Like he owned the tape. He would come out to the shows, and wherever the funny places that lives take us, like he ended up playing with Wolf Eyes for a moment. Lovely guy. So I'm playing in this band, and then the first band that I started touring with was Empire State Games, which was somehow between like my sophomore year and senior year of high school. I kind of had found some like-minded people and convinced them that like, yo, we can start putting on shows and doing these things ourselves. And so we rented a VFW hall. We put on shows, and we're going to, we were playing and going to all ages shows in the Detroit metro area. We're making connections. And at this time, my largest aspiration was just to be in a band that I like and be content with it. I never thought of it as a career. This wasn't a thing that existed. Like the apex was like Fugazi, but Fugazi also lives by their own rules, and Fugazi can sell out, a 5,000 capacity theater at $6 a head because they are Fugazi. You got one guy that was in Minor Threat, you got another guy that was in Right to Spring, like pedigree, and like Fugazi always, which a lot of the crowd that would show up to Fugazi were just, they didn't know Fugazi. They were just kind of curious about like, I have a Minor Threat shirt. I guess I'm going to go to the show. And then they're crowd surfing. And then Ian MacKaye singles them out and be like, yo, cut that shit out, and it's very embarrassing for everyone involved. So I'm getting into music, and all of a sudden it becomes this possibility like, all right, let's borrow your dad's van. Let's hop in the van and start touring. And so Empire State Games starts touring, and, I'm kind of making friends with people in the Detroit hardcore scene. So I'm kind of bouncing between Detroit and Canton is kind of situated where it's like you can drive half an hour to Detroit in one direction, and then you can drive 20 minutes in the other direction to Ann Arbor. And Ann Arbor had like a different kind of DIY scene, which was way more, emo core. That might be the more historically accurate word, where it wasn't quite emo. It was like still hardcore mixed with emo, but it's like dudes in cardigans lighting candles on their amps kind of thing, writhing on the ground, that kind of thing. Where in Detroit, it was hardcore. It was like big riffs, people doing karate in the pit, that sort of shit. And so I'm kind of bouncing between these two places. And my brother starts going to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And so I start hanging out there more. And because my brother is a very sociable person, which I don't think of myself as very sociable, but my brother is kind of getting involved. And he's always been a booster of mine. So he's like telling kids like, yo, he gets involved with the people that were doing like Michigan Fest. And he's like, my little brother has a sick band. Like, you guys should book him. And he's persistent enough that he like convinces some of these organizers that were putting on like benefit shows and all this stuff to be like, all right, I guess we'll give your little brother a chance here. And so we show up, we play. And I mean, I'm going to toot my own horn here and say that like for our age, we were fucking good. We were a lot better than like a lot of the other college bands. And all of a sudden it was like, people were like, oh shit, like Empire State Games is the real deal. Like we could write songs. We could play. Chris is a fantastically naturally gifted singer. And so all of a sudden, like a lot of things started happening to us. And we're hitting the road. We're hitting the road with Enkindle, Tuesday, Lawrence Arms. We're playing a lot of shows with Braid. We played the Outhouse in Lawrence, Kansas, and that's where we met the Get Up Kids, who at that point I knew them. I had been recommended a 7-inch of theirs by one of these older guys in Detroit, Chris Golan, who played for King for a Day, and I think he's in a band called Break Anchor now. But he was always like a very encouraging older brother to us. And he would help us like get on these shows in Detroit with like Hot Water Music. I have a flyer somewhere, not physically, but like a digital version of a flyer where we played a show at the skate shop, and it was Jimmy Eat World, Get Up Kids, Empire State Games, and Small Brown Bike. And we played the skate shop to like 30 people. And at this point, we're just like stoked. We are playing with bands that were like, all right, we look up to them because they're good. But we had no idea or pretense of what was about to happen, where like all of a sudden Jimmy Eat World blows up and the Get Up Kids blow up. And this becomes this thing, which is more than like DIY, which is now marketable.
Yeah, because I just had Chris from Braid on the show, and he was talking about everything going on in Chicago at the time,
Yes.
and everything going on with Braid and all the great bands happening.
Yes.
So why didn't Empire State Games blow up? Now, you were right, because I listened. I heard the band for the first time fairly recently, and it is very good. It's very good. Good riffs, excellent band. Why not you guys too?
We were too young to hold it together.
How old?
Let's see. I was when a lot of things started happening for us, I was a freshman in college. Our drummer Dave was still in high school. Our guitar player was also he was going to MSU, so he was kind of a freshman. And our singer was the only one that was like a sophomore going to Eastern State University. And at the time, it seemed like so risky. Like we were very happy. At least we were split, where the singer and I were very much entrenched into our own ideas of like DIY, of like, I don't ever want to play a show that's more than $6, and like trying to live this Fugazi world. Where I think Dave and Nate, our other guitar player, were like, hey guys, like the Get Up Kids just put out this record. They're starting to sell out places. We were starting to get calls from like the managers for Suicide Machines that wanted to help us out, and Vagrant Records. But it split up the band because I didn't think it was necessary. I didn't think it was going to be. I was very much set into like, I'm going to get my degree, like a physics degree, and I'll do the band like on my terms. I never thought it could be a thing where we're like, all right, I guess we're like going all in and just kind of living out of a van, which is really the time to do it when you're that young.
Right. Yeah, and I never made that jump either because I always worked and there just wasn't really an opportunity. So
this was the time when it was like, I mean, I remember touring where it's like, you're still using the Rand McNally map, but like for the first that during this time in touring, like gas was under $1. And so we'd tour and like we'd have the map. Trying to advance a show was a pain in the neck because like no one, it's like 10% of the venues even have a website. Like places are starting to have websites now. But gas is under $1, so it's like if someone paid us $100 guarantee or $150 guarantee, and we sold 107 inches, we would be swimming in money. Where now, like that's just not sustainable.
right.
It's just not sustainable. So we broke up before anything positive went our way. I think we had like an offer from Equal Vision. Equal Vision was really excited about us. But because of the internal strife between us and this kind of growing rift of like, some of us wanted to play it safe, which one of them was me. And the other guys were ready to just like hop in the van and like do this thing. It was headed for a divorce. And so the band split up. Dave and Nate went on to do another band called Moods for Moderns, and their first tape is phenomenal. They ended up doing a record on Doghouse Records, which is good. This was kind of at the time when like all the hardcore guys were like just, leaning more into Britpop and like garage rock was creeping its head, where like some of the guys in J June were kind of doing like all of a sudden everyone's like wearing bell bottoms and you have all these old punkers being like, you guys look like a bunch of fucking cosplay clowns. So like all this stuff is happening. Dave also played with Koufax for a little bit. And I love Dave, as adults and as time progresses and like life takes you places, like he's a very good friend. And like we've come to have a respect for each other. But at the time it was like, we couldn't get along. We were kids. We didn't know how to communicate to be like, yo, like this is the time to do it. And I remember it was a very sinking feeling, like a year after we broke up, which was like 1998 or 99 maybe. Like the next summer, all of a sudden, Fall Out Boy is on MTV2, and I'm like, these asshats stole our fucking sound, and I was so pissed. And whatever. It wasn't. We weren't ready for it. We couldn't keep it together. And I ended up playing in a lot of like other hardcore bands, and then I played in and in the way that like we grew out of things when like a lot of the kind of like mall emo stuff exploded. Like I was really losing touch with a lot of that stuff. So I ended up playing in kind of like a space rock band with some of my longest friends that I've had forever now. It was a band called Judah Johnson. And we have a record out on Flame Shovel Records. And to this day, like that's one of my favorite things that I've ever done. Very fruitful collaboration. Played with some of the best musicians and performers I've ever played with. The drummer for Judah Johnson, Charlie Koltek, is still one of my best friends. Dan Johnson, who was the singer and wrote the songs, still probably my favorite songwriter that I've ever worked with. And I mean, I would say even like top 5 songwriters of anything. Just incredibly talented people. And I learned a lot about making music and playing with them. They were, however, green to the touring experience and the expectations of like, look, like not everything gets handed to you, and you have to, sometimes you're just slumming it for a bit. So that was also hard, I think, being in that band, but it was very rewarding playing with those guys.
Eventually you ended up in Saves the Day around 2009. So my question for you, how old were you? How did you join? And what was your life like at that time? Like, did you want to tour full time? Did you want to get involved with a band? full time. Tell us about that.
So, 2009, like I had kept in contact. Arun and I played in another band after high school, somewhere in between there, and we had kept in touch with our good friend who also played in that band, Derek Grant, who was instrumental in putting out the first Saves the Day 7-inch. And Derek Grant kind of went through his own journey. He played with us after Suicide Machines. Then he joined this great Detroit band called Thoughts of Ionesco. And he was juggling a lot of hats. And then he got the call to join Alkaline Trio. And at this point, I'm living in a punk house in Ann Arbor, and we're having bands come our way. And one of these bands that played my basement, who I'm going to clown on them because I thought they were total clowns. They were called the Strider.
Oh yeah.
And they're playing my basement. They were so pro and polished, and they were kind of like on this generation of like very pop rock, I would say, but like DIY pop rock. And their drummer, Daraja, is in this band. And Arun kind of kept in contact with Daraja, and we both kind of kept in contact with Derek. And I guess Arun was looking for a gig. I was at this point playing with a singer-songwriter. I was kind of working this engineering job that I couldn't stand. I was also trying to start another band with Arun called Eons with Ash Bruce, who used to play drums in 400 Years. So I was kind of traveling between the Detroit area and Virginia, Richmond, Virginia, where Ash and Justin Bailey, the singer, was based out of. And so we're trying to do this band, and we're just trying to do music. And Arun was considering moving out to LA, which I was like, dude, you shred, you should totally do that. And Arun was kind of getting frustrated, spinning his wheels, trying to get something off the ground in Detroit. And I was touring a lot with Cameron McGill in Chicago, which was more like folk indie stuff. And while that seemed to be going well, there was also kind of like just the obstacle of like, you know, sometimes you end up with musicians who are shooting themselves in the foot a lot. And I love Cameron. Cameron is one of the most brilliant lyricists I've ever worked with, prolific songwriter. And so through Derek and Daraja, they were playing, I think, like Soundwave in Australia. And Daraja at this point is playing with Saves the Day. And he's talking to Derek about some frustration where, like, I think their longtime guitar player had left the band, and they had a stand-in that was not panning out. And Derek suggested Arun, and Daraja was like, "Oh yeah, I remember Arun. Like we were good friends, and Arun knows everybody. He's a very sociable character." And so they were like, "All right." And so Arun got asked to fly out and audition for Saves the Day, and they had a tour coming up with Alkaline Trio. And Arun and Chris got along great. And at this point, I think there were some other sort of like internal divisions between Daraja and Manny, where they started recording a new record, but Chris was not so stoked on how it was turning out, and sort of a toxic vibe apparently within the band. And I had gone to see them play, and I was really happy for Arun to like find a gig that worked well for him, and he seemed really stoked on it. And at this point, I had resigned myself. Where like, you know, I'm going to be making music. Like, I'm going to be happy with just making music with people I like and music that I enjoy. But I wasn't, you know, making it as a career was not something that I was considering. And I was like, just trying to find my footing. I was like doing assistant teaching. I had quit my engineering job, and I was just trying to find my next move when it must have been like either late fall of 2009 when Arun called me up to let me know that Daraja and Manny, their bass player, had left Saves the Day, and if I would be interested in joining. And I was like, yeah, like I want to give it a shot. To be honest, I didn't really know much of the Saves catalog too well at this point in time. I knew that they were an Equal Vision band. I knew that they had toured in the past with friends of mine in Saturday Looks Good to Me, but I didn't know much about the band beyond that. But I had seen their show, and I dug some of the songs, and like Arun had sent me like a playlist of some newer stuff, and I was like, all right, like this is cool stuff. I think it was like stuff from In Reverie, stuff from Sound the Alarm, that I was like, this is cool. Like there is a good songwriter here. So I joined for a tour, which was opening for Newfound Glory. It was going to start in January. So within like the span of a month or something, I learned a catalog of like 30 songs. And I think I got along with Chris great. You know, we had a lot of similar touch points of like growing up in punk and loving a lot of the same stuff, you know, Quicksand and Lifetime.
I remember seeing a old VHS of a 108 show, and you can see Chris on the side of the stage rocking out.
Oh, yeah? Oh,
yeah.
Man, I would love to ask him about that. Yeah, I mean, like 108 is still has informed the way I hear things so much still to this day. And like what I love about music and like the passion in music and like writing and singing about things that are meaningful. But yeah, so I joined basically for this tour kind of on it was really, for me, it was like a trial period. Like, am I going to like these guys? Am I going to like this environment? And it was fun. It was the right time in my life to be like, all right, I guess having learned lessons from the past. I was like, if I'm going to do this, like I'm going to do this. And, yeah, we got along great on that tour. It was a very different experience because for me, I had learned for so long how to get by touring in a van. And even with Cameron McGill, kind of like finding little secrets of how to maximize cost efficiency with renting a van from the airport where they don't charge you for miles. And the new minivans, you could like stack and fold the seats. And sometimes we'd actually like remove seats to be able to fit like a Wurlitzer piano and all our amps. So it was like I was coming from a very like frugal background, which was like we're sleeping on floors and like doing this van tour and being very diligent about money. And when we would sell 100 records, it was like a big deal. To like all of a sudden, I'm in this bandwagon type of machine, which is this. I don't know if anyone, the listeners, know what a bandwagon is, but it's basically like a converted RV where they remake the insides to be like a series of bunks. And the appeal of the bandwagon over a bus was that you don't need a CDL to drive this thing. So as part of a cost-saving measure for the first part of the tour, the idea was that we were going to take turns driving this. And over the course of the tour, it emerged that this thing is a terrifying thing to drive. And I remember being up in the front cab because the front cab is like separated from the rear part. And I would ride up there with our front of house, Mark Hudson. He was like the first guy to take a stab at driving it. And also the schedule of like being on a bus tour. Like we were following the Newfound Glory tour and they had a bus. So it's like they're doing overnight drives. So it's like after the show, we'd load up in this bandwagon thing and drive overnight, which is fully dangerous and exhausting if you don't have a dedicated driver. And so we all took turns driving it. And like on the open road, it's fine. Like I remember being up in that front cab with Chris and like we're sharing music, like, you know, he's kind of getting to know me through music. I'm getting to know him. Like I'm playing Elastica in the front cab and I'm just barreling through these open roads in Arizona, you know, driving this thing. And it's like when you are driving something that big, like the rules kind of don't matter. Like you will do what you want, you know, where it's like I turn on the signal to be like, all right, I'm like merging left here or I'm merging wherever. But, you know, I'm with the semis. It's like, I'm going to merge left now. So just, I'm letting you know, but it's going to happen. So I'm just, you know, doing, you know, this thing had like a top speed of like 60 miles per hour. So I'm like doing 60 down these Arizona roads and it's beautiful. But then I'm pulling into Phoenix where we're trying to load into the venue. And it's like, I'm circling the block trying to get the right angle so that I can turn into the alley behind the venue. And then they're asking me to like back this thing with the trailer, like between buses. And that was where like I would just like open the door and just like get out of this thing in traffic. And I'd be like, to our tour manager front of house, Mark, I'd be like, yeah, I'm getting out. Like, I can't do this. So I'd be like in Phoenix where it's like this jackknifed RV pulling a trailer, or like in busy downtown Phoenix, just get out in the middle of the street and be like, all right, Mark, like you're up, man. And so like 2 weeks in, we realized that like, yeah, we're gonna need a driver. We need a driver for this thing. But it was a fun tour.
And you've been in the band since 2009, right?
Basically, I mean, 2000. It was 2009 where I got asked to be in the band, but it was January 2010 where we were actually playing shows together and we were on the road.
And you must get along great with everybody because, that band has had some turnover, and you and a few others have been steady members since around that time.
It's been, I mean, since 2010, it's been Arun, I, and Chris, and we've had our share of drummers. And we still had, there's no ill blood between anybody that I've played with, or even past members. But it's like any band. It's a marriage, and if anything that I've realized with my age, it's like, there are ups, there are downs, there are disagreements, and it's like the way that life happens can also affect the relationship. And it's a marriage. I can say that now. I feel like everyone's in a much better place than we were 5 years ago, even. But it's a marriage.
Yeah, all bands are. It's a common comparison, but damned if it isn't true.
Yeah, and I think if I didn't join the band when I did, perhaps again it would be different, and perhaps some of the older members, if they had made it to a point where they were at different stages in their lives and had developed or leaned in or made their own calculations, maybe they'd be in the band. I don't know if I'd be the bass player. It's like I happened to be there in 2010 when I was turning 30, and with the sense of maturity that I had then, which is very different than the sense of maturity than I have now and what I expect out of like being in a band and in a relationship.
Right. Her Head's on Fire.
Yes.
Now, we have you, we have Joe Grillo from Garrison.
Yes.
Who we know and love. Who's the drummer? What's his name?
Currently we have Mike Susi, who's played in a ton of bands with Jeff Dean, the guitar player. My joke about Jeff Dean is that like, I met him in Chicago, but he's been living in Chicago I met him in Detroit, but he's been playing in Chicago and living in Chicago for a long time. And he's got like 10 bands going on at any given moment. And if you are a show goer in the city of Chicago, if you own an instrument in Chicago, there will come a time where you are in a band with Jeff Dean. Everyone, your time will come. Jeff Dean has been in a band with everybody.
It's funny you mentioned that because the drummer you have now, is that the same one who was on the first record?
No. So originally the first record and the second record, they're both Jeff Gensterblum.
Because Jeff, whenever I go see a band in New York, Jeff is drumming for the band.
Yeah, Jeff is one of those guys because Jeff is a fantastic drummer. He's one of these world-class guys that just has the chops. He's got like a metronome inside his heart. And he's super tasty and creative. And just such a chill guy. And that's what with my experience with playing music, it's like, once you have people that are relaxed and chill and grown-ups like that almost matters more than anything else. Because, unless you're doing it by yourself, like, you're going to be collaborating with people and traveling with people, and like having someone that you can get along with is so important. And that's broken up so many other bands. And it's been a difficult thing with so many other bands, that I've played with over the years.
Yeah. So how does the band get started? How do we all connect?
It's basically Jeff Dean with his Rolodex deciding one day that I'm going to call my friend Joe and Jeff G and tell them that we're starting a band. That's basically how it works, where Jeff Dean already has a record written, and he tells everybody, he's like, you guys are in the band now. And everyone's like, okay, I guess. And and so at some point, I had been working with Jeff. Like, he was in another band called man, why does it escape me now? I produced a record, Airstream Futures. I had been working with Jeff with this band called Airstream Futures, helped produce some records, helped co-write some songs. And there was a time where there were between bass players, and I think I actually played on the record, on the first one. And I think Jeff is always just kind of putting people together. And so at some point he had sent demos to Jeff G, and they kind of had some rehearsals, and then Jeff roped me in. And then next thing I know, I'm on a flight to New York City with Jeff Dean, and I'm meeting Grillo and Gensterbloom for the first time. And we have a rehearsal. And because we're all older guys who know our skill set and are just pro and just love to have fun, we have one rehearsal and it sounds great. It's like, all right, well, that's the band.
Wow, just like that.
Just like that. And then we go out for ramen and we're laughing and we're just kind of telling the same jokes. And it's just an easygoing vibe. And the next thing I know, it's like, all right, we're playing shows. I think for the first, up until even like the second record, like we maybe had 5 rehearsals, but we were, there was never a stage where we had more rehearsals than shows. We rehearsed once. I think we maybe played a show that weekend. And then like the next weekend we had like 2 more shows lined up. And so we had one rehearsal for that and then kind of took off from there, where, I can't say that we have like a huge touring history, because it's like there were 3 dads in the band between Grillo, Dean, and myself. And we all live in different places. But it became very meaningful for us when we do get together. It's like a very special time. It's like, all right, here are the songs. Like, everyone has a great deal of trust in what we do, and so everyone just kind of brings their A game, and then it's like, let's rock a show. And being the age that we are and the experience that we are, I think we kind of bring like an attitude of like, we're not, we have high standards for ourselves, for what we want to bring to the table. But, Gensterbloom is the greatest example, where it's like, I would just show up with my bass. Dean would show up with his guitar. And, when I was 20, I was so tied into the idea of like, oh no, like when we're hitting the road, like I have to bring my Ampeg SVT and my 8x10, and we're going to put it in the van and fucking unload it and carry it up these stairs because that's my sound. But then over the time I was like, no, man, like I know who I am as a player, and like plug me into a crate amp and give me 5 minutes and I'll dial it in.
Yeah, that they always say, like, Jimi Hendrix or any classic player, right? You can give them any instrument and they'll play it and it'll sound like them. And I like that idea that, me or you or any other musician can do that too.
We leaned into that, and Jeff G, it's like, drums are, when you hit the drum, like that's an acoustic instrument. I can imagine it's much harder for a drummer to travel, to have to play somebody else's snare or somebody else's kit, where like the heights and the positioning matter so much. But Jeff G is, he's dialed. Like anything that he hits sounds like him.
Yeah.
We show up to these gigs and it's like this trash piece drum set. We played this one gig in Rhode Island where the band was amazing, but we're watching them set up, and like this drummer had some crazy setup with like rototoms and like all this crazy stuff. And, when you're setting up rototoms, like the stakes are raised. Like, all right, bro, like you better play those rototoms and it better be mind blowing, or we will all laugh at you. Like you can't be playing rototoms at the punk gig and like, it can't be corny. That's the other thing. And we watched this band and they were amazing. Some kind of like proggy krautrock Fugazi blonde redhead thing, and we were all like, "Holy shit!" But then it's Jeff's turn. We were up, and it's like, all right, he's playing this guy's kit, and they got the rototoms, and so he's like kind of adjusting the heights, and Jeff is a very economical drummer. Like he writes his parts with intention. But it was like we're playing the show, and it's Jeff on rototoms. He made it work, and it was one of those things. It's like super hilarious. Like we're not precious about our gear, but we're only precious about and I wouldn't say precious. It's like the vibe and our intention. What matters way more than like the amp or the drum kit that we're playing.
Right. I think that's a good way to approach it. And I always try to remind myself, like, have fun.
Have fun.
Why did you get into this in the first place?
Exactly. Because, and I realize like, the more that you have fun, the audience starts to have fun. The audience is always rooting for you, no matter, you think they may not, but like no one comes and pays for a show for Schadenfreude.
Right.
They want you to succeed. If you're having a hard time, they see that struggle, but they want you to overcome it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, especially like our age now. Like when I was a smarmy 16-year-old kid, I might watch a minute of a band and be like, this sucks, or write it off for some dumb reason. But now I want everyone to succeed.
I want everyone to succeed. And it's very joyous to watch someone do a new thing, or for me to try to wrap my brain about like, all right, this is new, or like, just that someone is getting up there and attempting their version of art or self-expression is just really beautiful. And I'm very thankful to be in an environment where I can see something new and see people work through it. It's just a fucking cool, live music is a fucking magic trick, man.
It is.
So many things have to be working in tandem in order for it to happen. And we take it for granted.
But not anymore after the pandemic.
Sure. Yeah.
I hope. We have the new Her Head's on Fire LP called Strange Desires. I love it, and I hope everyone else out there checks it out and loves it as well. Tell us about the record, Rodrigo. When did we record it? Were we all together? Tell us about it.
Let me think. As with all Her Head's on Fire stuff, it starts with Jeff Dean having riffs and songs basically charted out and sending them to Gensterbloom. And I think he sent it to him with like some notes, kind of like, all right, I'm looking for like a tom beat or like a Soundgarden of a groove on this. And as far as I know, and from what Gensterbloom told me, it was like basically guitar and click track. And so Gensterbloom, in his magical mind, makes sense of this.
Wow.
And just takes some of Jeff's ideas or notes and is like, all right, yeah. There's, sometimes you hear a riff and it's very obvious what needs to be done. Like you don't need to rethink the wheel. It's like, all right, this riff needs to go. It has momentum.
Yeah. Like with certain riffs, it's like you do this or you do this.
Yeah. It's like, and Jeff is one of those guys that he understands that he's not trying to show off and be like, I'm going to reinterpret this to be some polyrhythm thing. It's like he gets the meat and potatoes of Jeff Dean's riffage. And so Jeff would just lay drum tracks to this click track. And lo and behold, the way that Gensterbloom interprets Dean's guitar already has an arrangement. Which is the wild thing to me. Like, I hear back the record and it's like there are some songs that have like an intro where like the riff repeats and it's like a drum intro or something. And this, in whatever insane way, already existed in Jeff Dean's mind. And him attempting to speak drummer to Gensterbloom. However that landed with Gensterbloom, and Gensterbloom just being like, okay, I guess like 2 bars of this guitar intro, and then what am I going to do? Am I going to play through it? Am I going to kind of like do breaks or whatever? Gensterbloom interpreting this riff and just playing drums to it. And then that would get sent to Grillo, who would hear, now with the drums, now the song has bones. Now the song has like an arrangement. There's energy in places. There's places where there's calm. And so Grillo listens to the guitar and starts writing top lines. And like, I think there were some songs, I think Gorilla probably spoke about it, where like some songs had an immediate idea, an immediate image. And so he would send back a vocal idea that he recorded on his iPhone or in his closet back to Jeff Dean, within the half hour. And now with all this stuff being laid down, demos being made, Dean would call me over to his house in the suburbs of Chicago, not too far from where I'm at. And I would go over there, and some songs I would hear for the first time at his place. Some of them, knowing that I'd be coming over the next day, I'd like listen to them at night and just kind of workshop some basic ideas. But I try to just be very reactive and just trust my gut in terms of like, again, like, am I just following the guitar? Like, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. Or other places where Jeff Dean is kind of doing some other kind of more ethereal stuff. And this is where my geeky music stuff is like, all right, I love Jeff, and this is not a slight, but like Jeff sometimes is not aware that the riff is changing keys, for example. Like he'll write a riff that's in the key of F, and then all of a sudden in the verse, he's in the key of B flat, which isn't that huge of a shift, but it's a very subtle thing that he would do. It's a very Jeff Dean thing. He's just listening to where the riff in his mind needs to go.
Yeah, I don't even know what keys are. I just play.
Yeah.
And look for what sounds good.
And that's what he does. And so like I have other musical background. Like I studied composition in high school, and I took courses in counterpoint in college. So I'm like looking at those riffs and being like, all right, like, well, can I take this down another rabbit hole? So I'm choosing bass notes. I'm finding my spaces, stretching the keys, and I'm using my love of post-hardcore, Quicksand and Elliott Smith, where it's like I can expand the tonality and the feeling of this in how I'm playing bass. So there would be sections where it's just a drum groove and the guitar is staying the same. And I'm like, all right, well, this is room for me to do something completely different on bass and make the music move in a way that didn't move before. So like for me, it was a very freeing opportunity to almost take like this Paul McCartney approach where like the bass player is the anchor, where like now that everything is set, there's vocals, the drums are giving it the momentum and the structure. As a bass player, all of a sudden I have this freedom to be like, now I know where to fill in the gaps. Now I know where the music has power. Now I know where I can take it to a new place. And so I would demo the stuff at Jeff Dean's house, and a lot of times I'd be like, all right, Jeff, I have a crazy idea. I want you to hear it. I think it's not necessarily maybe what you had in mind. And all of the times that I would bring Jeff I'd play them on these demos, and he would be super stoked. And again, this kind of goes back to like the trust of the band, which is just like, he's like, all right, Rod's going to do what Rod does. And, after this, it's like all of a sudden we have a full album that's demoed. And we made some time, after I had finished all these bass demos, we were trying to get Jason Narducci. We kind of got him involved to try to help us produce it, but like schedules didn't necessarily match. So he was kind of giving us some notes via email, some really good suggestions. But we just booked time at Echo Mill Studio, where Jeff Dean is one of the engineers there. And Genster Bloom and I, we tracked bass and drums live. And then Grillo came out a couple days later and tracked vocals, and then we did guitars and like a couple overdubs. And over the course of a week, the record was done. And that's that.
Yeah. Well, I love the record. I think the production is great. And yeah, it's interesting to hear how it all came together. And yeah, there's what I like about the band is I really like the riffage. I don't know, there's just this swing that certain songs have, and it's not too Midwestern techie emo, it's not too pop punk, it's not too post-hardcore. It's just like, it's got elements of all those things and all the bands we love that we talked about, but it's got, it's just got its own sound. And I like what you guys are doing. I've seen you a couple times over the years, when the first EP came out. And when was the last time I saw you? I think at that Iodine show in New York City with Jonah.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah. and I've just continued to like you guys a lot.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'm really proud of it, man. I think Grillo, I mean, it's like, I feel like I'm just so proud of everyone involved. Like, everyone just knocked that out of the park.
Yeah.
Grillo, just incredible melodic writer. His lyrics are, I think, are just so beautiful. And I feel like, it's crazy. Sometimes I get paranoid. Like, I feel like he's talking about me directly in a crazy way. They're just so, he managed to kind of find this like Sam Cooke thing where he's saying these very simple things, but somehow they feel very profound to me, like these kind of like universal truths that just he found in a phrase, just pulled them out of the ether. And Jeff Dean, man, I mean, like, he's not going to toot his own horn as a guitar player, but like he's a force. He's an incredibly prolific guy, and it's inimitable what he does, because you couldn't get Jeff Dean to play in like a Tame Impala cover band like that. That's just not gonna happen. Jeff Dean is like a time capsule that exists only in Jeff Dean world, which is like an amalgamation of like, he, and the group text, he's always sending us like, he's like, this is the greatest song in the world. And he sends over like some obscure Leatherface thing. And I'm like, really? So we all tease him. We're like, Leatherface, really, bro? I don't fucking know Leatherface, but he, like, in Jeff Dean's world, it's like New Model Army, Leatherface, and Dinosaur Jr. And that's his wheelhouse. And he has like a deep understanding of that music and that language.
Yeah.
That, he's very open-minded to like a lot of other music, and there's like a lot of other things that we relate on, but it's like you put a guitar in front of him and the true Jeff Dean comes out. Like that's who he is. Those riffs are Jeff.
Yeah.
And Gensterbloom, like his ability, I mean, I remember riding in the car like with them. We played a show, and like we were kind of like, this was before we made the record. We had these demos, and we're just kind of chatting about like, all right, how we're going to do this and all the stuff. And I was, to be honest, like I didn't really even know the backstory of like how it all came together at that point. So I was asking Gensterbloom, I'm like, how did you and Jeff like work this out? And he's like, yeah, he just sent me these click tracks with like a note, like I want this to sound like New Model Army or whatever. And I was like, I don't fucking know New Model Army. And we're just cracking up because like, that's Dean. Like he's very deep in his own references, 50% of which we understand. And like the 50 other percent is like some band that had 1 7-inch or what have you. And Gensterbloom is just such a phenomenal drummer that he is able to interpret this primitive guitar language and come out with something that makes sense, So like the record is almost it's almost like 4 people learning to talk. Like the band itself is a toddler, and each member is like 4 stages of psychological development where like at the end of it ends with something coherent.
Yeah, I guess all bands are like that in a sense.
Sure. Yeah. However, and everyone writes different. It's like, sometimes you're in that rehearsal space and like someone just brings a riff, and like maybe everyone's excited about it. Maybe only the drummer is the one that's excited about it. And like they start playing a groove, and in that way it starts to click, and sometimes that's something that happens over the course of 15 minutes. Sometimes that's a thing that happens over the course of several frustrating weekends of like, all right, I'm going to push this riff again, guys. Like, let's try it again. And, in the case of Her Head's on Fire, it was like a Dropbox, just kind of bouncing files back and forth.
Well, I love the new record, and I encourage everyone else to check it out. And Rod, I've been listening to you in various forms over the years. I really loved this conversation, and I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad we were able to connect. I'm looking at the time now, and like we definitely went long, but I had a blast. I hope that you did too. Good luck with the editing.
And there you have it. Rodrigo Palma. Excellent, excellent conversation. This is one of those really well-rounded conversations that kind of goes all over the place. But I found the whole thing interesting, and I found Rodrigo so pleasant to talk to. I didn't know about everything that was going on in Chile in the 70s and 80s and 90s with the plebiscite, and that whole story of how Rodrigo and his family emigrated over here from Chile. Really compelling stuff. Everything that his mom did to secure them a place to live, I was impressed. And I'm so happy that his family got settled here and that Rodrigo was able to do everything he's done. Empire State Games, awesome band. Her Head's on Fire, a band I love more and more the more I get to know them and the more I hear them and the more I see them. And I'm really enjoying their latest record, Strange Desires, and Saves the Day. I mean, come on, Saves the Day are a staple. I've been listening to them since, let's see, 1999? 1998? One of those. So really great stuff. Thank you so much, Rodrigo, for coming on the show. And now we have this month's Artist Spotlight interview with Nick Hannon of Sons of Alpha Centauri. Sons of Alpha Centauri are an instrumental band from the UK. They've been at it for a while now, but they really caught my attention with the release of Pull, their latest LP, which just came out this year via Exile on Mainstream Records. And the legendary Jonah Matranga has teamed with Sons of Alpha Centauri to do vocals for their 2021 LP Push and their latest LP Pull. So I urge you to go check out those records and everything else Sons of Alpha Centauri have to offer because they're a great band. So here's my conversation with Nick Hannon of Sons of Alpha Centauri. Enjoy. All right, we are here now with Nick Hannon. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Keith. Nice to meet you.
Yes, Nick, nice to meet you as well. I'm excited to have you here. I am a new fan of Sons of Alpha Centauri. The last two records you did with the legendary Jonah Matranga definitely caught my attention, but you guys have been doing it for a while before that, so I'm interested to learn about you and the band. So, you know what, Nick, tell us first. You live in England, the UK?
That's right, yes. Myself, Marlon, the guitarist, and everyone involved in the band is based in the UK, formed in 2001. And we're in the south of the UK, so just south of London, probably about 50 miles out on the coast. Place.
Where at?
It's an island actually off of the mainland called the Isle of Sheppey. That's our main area. So it's an island just off of an island. We were all born there and live in and around that area.
Interesting. So they've got islands off of islands over there.
Yeah, that's right. There's a few. The Isle of Wight, the Isle of Man, and in our case, the Isle of Sheppey, which is where we're at. It's kind of 50 miles from London or so.
How is it? Is it quaint? It sounds quaint.
It's a great word. It can be quaint. It's kind of a bit industrial. A lot of the landscapes and the contrasting between the docks and the industry and the sea and the maritime aspects have all sort of compounded themselves into our music. But we're very not associated with London necessarily. We're a lot happier to be on the sea, on an island. There's a nice bit of isolation there, but equally it can be quite quaint in some of the more rural parts, but in some of the more industrial areas, it's definitely has its own vibe as well.
I like the sound of that. Yeah, I actually visited London when I was 18 years old, which was a long time ago at this point, and I liked it a lot, and I would like to get back there again at some point.
It's a fantastic city. It's so great to have on the doorstep. And it's been a challenge actually to often play in other parts of the UK when you have London on the doorstep, because we would play and go up there and see bands and meet people, and then when you've got a city that's almost 20 times bigger probably than Birmingham or Manchester, it was often harder to get around and out of that. So we were just blessed to have it there, and it changes so much, but then it's so good to go to some places which are just the epicenter of particular communities like Camden and places like that, which in their absence, there would be a huge vacuum of culture and everything for the whole of the country. So yeah, you should, if you can, try and make it back. It's an incredible city.
How would you define your musical taste? When I have people on the show, I'm curious if they had an entry point with punk, hardcore, metal, that whole scene, because when I discovered that, it kind of changed the whole course of my life. So tell us about your musical taste, past and present.
I would say I became musically aware with like a lot of, I was born in the sort of the early 80s. So I became musically aware through listening to music through my dad and, blues and jazz and constantly being surrounded by music. But I could feel my own sense of taste developing just as grunge really started to become sort of prominent. And
yes,
it was the Seattle scene that was so enticing, because clearly there was Nirvana, but it was the likes of Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains. And then you could really start to get into and explore all of these affiliated and associated bands, because I would, and friends of mine, as we were getting into this, we would clamour for information to try and find out, like, who are Mudhoney? Like, how are they associated with it? What's going on here with Screaming Trees? Wow. And then from there, once you've been exposed to a scene as fertile as what was happening in Seattle in the early 90s, then we became quite good at being able to, as more and more things started to happen in the 90s, they started to happen at an incredible rate, didn't they, in terms of our exposure. So I would have friends who were going off and exploring Touch and Go in Chicago. There was the New York hardcore scene. So everyone would be sort of, exploring that. So some of the hardcore kids would be saying, hey, we're into this thing called New York hardcore. But by that point, there had been the movement of hardcore, and then they were moving into the likes of Life of Agony and Vision of Disorder. And of course, Helmet and things like that. Then I myself found myself getting into the Palm Desert scene. So myself and a few friends would deep dive into the Palm Desert scene, and you'd get into Caius, who would be like the gateway band, and then you'd find Fatso Jetson and the Earthlings and all these associated, affiliated bands like Mondo Generator and things like that, with all the various different, and then it would just go on, and we would just go from place to place, like, oh, what's happening over here in Sacramento? Wow, what's happening over here? So it was really the wave of American alternative microcosm of scenes that was just so immersive, and the printed press in the UK was really good at presenting those individual scenes, actually. So you could quickly get into and through a few gateway bands, you could quickly deep dive into 10 or 20 bands. So before you knew it, someone who was listening to Fugazi was all of a sudden presenting you with 3 or 4 Lungfish albums, and you'd be like, there's so much here to take on. So I would say that the gateway was really what happened in Seattle, but the way that happened and all of the different scenes that came through would be, how myself and my friends and groups of friends that I came to meet would get into things. So yeah, that was it, and there was so much to get into, and there still is. Retrospectively, I'll be finding things like Shiner, and I'll go, wow, Kansas City scene. What happened there in the 90s? And there'd be another 5 or 6 bands. And you just keep going, and Discogs is such a fantastic resource for helping to link all of that together and things. So, yeah, the alternative movement of the 90s, which was in itself just the most defining part of my life, and continues to define who I am artistically and where I tend to go in terms of creativity.
I like that. Yeah, I was in 4th grade when that whole alternative thing really kicked off, the Seattle scene, all of that, and that was a real game-changing moment for me too, where I really got into more guitar-driven rock and not just, top 40 or whatever was on the radio. And that's the great thing about this show, is it keeps me deeply connected to music, and there's just infinite stuff out there, infinite scenes to discover.
Yep.
And then it just takes you down a rabbit hole, and then I spend time on Discogs just like you do. And I used to worry, like, oh no, what if I run out of bands to talk to on the show?
Mm-hmm.
I do not worry about that anymore. The more time that goes on, the more I realize, like, I will never run out, ever.
Absolutely. And I've found that it's been really refreshing to see labels, particularly in my experience from the early 2000s, become this imprint of quality. So my first experience of that was Man's Ruin, with the desert rock and the garage rock of the late 90s with Frank Kozik. But then I went on to experience it with elements of Relapse, Hydra Head Records in particular, obviously Discord Records. Each of these records labels would affiliate themselves with particular artists, and then they would associate themselves with particular labels as well. So Hypertension Records, various different record labels that would become associated and affiliated with other labels. And then you deep dive into there, like Tortuga Records, using the Hydra Head example there. But it was incredible, really, to look at Discogs and just deep dive into the labels and into the bands affiliated with the labels, and then how they work as an industry and a scene together. That was and has continued to be sort of a source of inspiration for me to keep going.
Tell us about Sons of Alpha Centauri. When does it get started? How does it get started?
We, myself and Marlon, were at school together. We were sort of moving into college, and we just finished a couple of bands together. And rather than do the usual sort of churn and burn, where you write 6 songs together, you go out, you play quite a few shows, you begin to tire of those songs, so you try and write a couple of new ones. We basically got together and sort of wrote 35 songs together to try and find an identity of the band. This is around about sort of 2001 time. And from there, we felt it would be a good idea to just sort of keep going instrumentally for the time being. We never set out to be an instrumental band, but it felt that we were challenging ourselves to keep the songs interesting if we were instrumental to begin with, and we felt that we would sort of add vocals retrospectively. And we were sort of knew most of the bands in and around, so we got to meet our drummer at the time, Stevie B. He was in quite a few local hardcore bands, and those guys were a little bit older than us, and they were all massively into Quicksand and the God Machine and Helmet and things like that. So when we showed Steve what we were doing, he wanted to get on board. And then quite quickly we had a band that could move and started to play a few local shows. But we were different because we were instrumental, and we weren't overly influenced by one particular thing. We weren't like, we want to sound exactly like this band. We had brought together a whole myriad of different influences, and being instrumental had kept the music as interesting as we could go, because there wasn't an awful lot of bands that were doing instrumental, particularly in sort of the early 2000s for us. We very quickly became, fortunately, friends with Will from Karma to Burn. And he took us under his wing a little bit in terms of how to be and how to act, and sort of evolve away from just being a local band that would play around the Kent area. And once we started working with him, we got into London, and some quite major things started to happen from the band from there. So we owe him and Karma to Burn quite a lot in that respect.
Amazing that you sat down and wrote 30 songs together to develop an identity. The willpower and the dedication it must take, because when I start a band, I'm like, all right, let's get going. Let's write the 6 songs. Let's get out there and play. Like, that's usually the way it goes.
Yes, and it was challenging because there was always that temptation, because there was so much happening around us. Our friends would be going off and playing shows in various towns and cities around us, and we thought, maybe we should just get a drummer. Let's just get out there. But we kept, every time we sat down, something new would happen. We'd go in a slightly different direction. And before we knew it, there was almost 2 identities of the band starting to form. And that kept things really fresh for us, because it meant that we didn't start to stagnate. We were actually able to, if one thing happened, and we felt that we were a bit overly polarized by a particular style of music, we could switch to another style. And that has worked for us and continues to work for us, to this day, to be able to transition from one almost style to another to keep things fresh and interesting for ourselves as well as for others.
Yeah, I noticed a definite shift with the 2021 LP Push. How does that come about? I mean, did you intentionally decide to shift the sound? Does that happen as a result of teaming up with Jonah? Tell us about that.
I think it had been coming for a while. we had spent, as I mentioned, quite a lot of time pursuing the stoner rock sort of alternative riff rock thing, where it had been very instrumental. And we had done a lot in that genre with those guys. We did some stuff with people from the Palm Desert with Yawning Man, formed a collaboration with them called Yawning Sons, and we'd really pushed through on the desert rock, stoner rock thing, and we had written a tremendous amount of material that was more in the hardcore side of things, and that felt the songs were shorter. It was harder to compose actual songs as opposed to longer, more building up sort of post metal, post rock sort of stuff. And when it came to actually bringing these songs together, we reached out to Jonah, who is, an incredibly sort of influential and inspirational character, and he was completely up for collaborating in terms of doing these vocals. And initially, it was just going to be a couple of songs on an instrumental record, but when we worked with him and he had his lyrical input and some fantastic ideas, and he came over to the UK and was sitting in the studio, it helped us to really reprofile the way that we were approaching songs, so that there was this voice and ideology in the room of, actually, these are not just tracks anymore, these need to be songs, there needs to be structure. And there was a huge sort of evolutionary and maturity drive. So we really wanted to evolve from the more post-metal stuff into the post-hardcore, and it certainly brought with it a certain amount of maturity as well. So it was a natural step from us to do that. We still occasionally switch to the sort of the stoner rock kind of stuff, and that keeps it fresh, but really the maturity and the interest has been piqued by the post-hardcore and the vocals, which has really pushed us as musicians to go as far as we possibly could with it, rather than sitting in what has become a quite comfortable spot of instrumental music.
Right. Yeah. And it's and that sound, as demonstrated on Push and the new LP Pull, which was just released in March of this year via Exile on Mainstream Records. That's really, I love that sound. That sound demonstrated on those records is a sound I love, and that I think is not, well, you know what? It's more of a thing now. There's a lot of bands doing like kind of a grungy post-hardcore thing, and I love it. That is a sound I seek all the time.
Fantastic. Yes, we wanted it to have an element of nostalgia, but with a production that felt very modern without being overly produced. And it was quite a tough ask, actually, for the various people that were involved who were producing it. It was produced by a chap called Dan Lucas, who had a history of working in the sort of the Kent hardcore scene, and he knew where we were trying to take things. He was like, "Oh, you want something that's nostalgic but almost feels very fresh, and it's recognizing the past but also looking to the future." And we didn't want to be sorely stuck in the past, but obviously there's huge nods to it. So it was very much one foot in on each side of the timeline, which was a real challenge to balance out, actually. But thank you very much for your kind words on Push and Pull. We really appreciate it, because we were concerned that we'd spent 15 years building up a fan, a sort of a collective of people that had followed the band, who were like, we expect instrumental rock, you guys to be playing things like, Desert Fest, and to be supporting and playing with Monster Magnet or whoever, Brant Bjork. And then all of a sudden there's this post-hardcore record with vocals. And it was because I can remember growing up listening to bands, and sometimes you'd be like, oh, that's a bit much. You've stepped too far outside the circle there, I think. But no, everyone that we've spoken to has really appreciated that, and the fact that we can balance those two arenas now feels unique. It's nice to put out a record on Ripple, and then hopefully look to put out records, as we have done on Exile on Mainstream, and moving forward on post communities that are affiliated with the post-hardcore scene, and being able to bridge those scenes as well, because they have become somewhat at risk of becoming too isolated within themselves and becoming sort of chasms of isolation. So it's quite nice to sort of bridge those for ourselves, because it keeps things fresh and interesting for ourselves to move between those areas, and equally to take our listeners and hopefully other people's listeners on that journey as well, which is great.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that the reception has been good, because I love the record. And how did you hook up with Jonah to do vocals on these LPs? Like, how did that idea come together? Because typically you are an instrumental band. So how do we decide, number one, we're going to have vocals on this, and number two, Jonah is going to be the vocalist? Jonah Matranga,
Yes.
of Far and New End Original and many other great bands.
I had followed him and Far pretty much since I was exposed to Water and Solutions. And then when he went into doing One Line Drawing in the sort of Internet 1.0, as I can sort of recall it, when it was more about sort of email communication and forums, and it was still fairly primitive compared to where things are now. He had a website, he had a forum, he was very, very engaged with his fan base. And I followed him through that, and I just kept in contact with what he was doing through his website. So even through the MySpace days and the transition to social media and things like that, he still, and same as us, we still had a website, and we still do have a website. Big believer in maintaining sort of the identity of a band through their own individualized sort of website, as opposed to pertaining to another sort of identity, through social media or things like that. And he kept that going since the early 2000s. So he was running something called Ideas, which is a community where you can engage with him, and he might do a cover for you, or he might write a song on behalf of someone. And it was just a really neat, interactive, engaging way of speaking and working with people within his fan base. And so we reached out to him through that and said, we've got some quite more abrasive tracks actually than what you've been doing for perhaps the past 20 years. How would you feel about re-engaging with that? Not knowing where he was, personally. And he said, sure, I'll give it a listen. And he was quite happy with what he heard, but he wanted to engage and interact personally. So we made that work, because he still works, and still tours, and was able to come to the UK. So we were able to make that work. Then we're able to make that work again through a dedicated session, and it just built. It went from 3 tracks to 6 to pretty much the 8 or 9 on Push. And then for Paul, because we knew we were going to do a whole record, we worked a lot more closely on the tracks, myself and Marlon, and then engaged with Jonah, knowing more along the lines of what captivated him and what motivated him musically. So hence why there does feel that there is quite a jump from Push to Paul, and then hopefully moving forward there will be a similar jump as well.
I love that, and I love how it came together. So he actually came out there to work with you guys.
He did, yes. So the first time around he was on tour, and he stopped off, so he had a few days in the studio. We had some time. So the nice thing is, where we are, we sort of rehearse by the sea. So it gives every artist who's on tour, or any artist who's coming over and spending time with us, a real sense of who we are, because we practice and rehearse by the sea. We're surrounded by the sea completely. And so he was able to, involve himself in that life with us for a few days, and then go into the studio for a few days. And then another time we spent a lot longer in the studio to get that down as well. And then for Paul, I think almost all of the vocals were tracked in person in the studio. And that was in the countryside, which was really nice, because again, there's just lots of space, fresh air, and all the things that are amenable to, the healthy lifestyle that we're all kind of trying to pursue with Jonah and everything. So yeah, it was really positive, and that's one of the main things that we try and push, is just the inspirational aspects of those albums is meant to be quite introspective and quite positive and quite healthy, as opposed to negative. So yeah, that the way that it was created, we've tried to infuse into those records.
Yes, and I told Jonah when he was on the show last that it was very exciting to hear him in a band like this again, because it hasn't happened in a while.
No, it probably hasn't happened. I mean, sort of New End original, and yeah, there's I don't think there's very many bands that have pushed. We've quite literally the heaviness factor when we had a transitional period where Steve, our original drummer, was on half of Push, and then Mitch from Willhaven was on the second half of Push. But when we knew that Mitch was going to be playing pretty much the whole record, we did think, okay, let's see how much further we can take this in this direction. And I thought at one point, is this going to switch Jonah off? But no, he he stepped up big time, and I think it's been quite cathartic for him actually to have this avenue, because he's got so many different avenues that he pursues artistically. It's nice for there to be this band, hardcore orientated project that's now feels like it's got sort of a good momentum behind it and some recognition. So we're eternally grateful for everyone who supported, including yourself. So thanks very much. It's incredible.
Yes. Very happy to get to speak to you and enjoy the music. I really love it. So what about the future of Sons of Alpha Centauri? Will there be more music? Will there be more music with Jonah? Will there be a live performance with Jonah at some point? What do we have planned?
At the moment, we're looking at bringing together some London shows. At the moment, they are instrumental, we anticipate. And that will be hopefully next year, which will be great. We're very much hoping to start writing and pre-production for a new record with Jonah. So he said that he's excited to hear the new tracks as they start to come together. And we're thinking, where is that going to go? We want to sort of make sure that there's a similar jump from there was Push to Pull to the next record. And we're always thinking about ways of trying to make it work potentially with Jonah. So if he was to be on tour here in the UK and it was the right time, then yeah, we'd never say never to something like that. The logistics are challenging, but they're not impossible. So we're again really grateful for having London on the doorstep. It does mean that we can make things happen in terms of people coming in and being able to play those shows. So we're very positive that that's the sort of thing that can happen. And at the moment, the next steps for the band is we'll probably be looking at collaborating with Jonah probably as we move into 2025, and hopefully picking up a new record in 2026 or so. So we're very excited about where the band's going when it comes to this sort of this project and what we've created so far.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to more. And Nick, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.